Okay, welcome everyone to this traffic safety webinar sponsored by the North Carolina Governor's Highway Safety Program. This is one in a series of webinars addressing topics of interest for traffic safety professionals. The series is co-hosted by the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State University and the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center. Today's topic is after the conviction, using evidence-based practices in assessment, sentencing, and treatment to reduce recidivism of high-risk impaired drivers. Our presenter is Mark Stadola with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. As NHTSA's probation fellow, Mark brings over 30 years of experience working in the field of court management and adult probation in Arizona. He worked at the Maricopa County Adult Probation Department for 18 years, serving in a number of capacities, including Division Director, overseeing drug and alcohol treatment programs, problem-solving courts, and services for the mentally ill. Mark later became the court administrator of the Tempe Municipal Court, where he served for 8 years managing the court's day-to-day activities. Most recently, Mark served as Program Services Manager in the Adult Probation Services Division of the Arizona Supreme Court, where he had oversight of treatment programs for Arizona's adult probation departments. Mark has presented on training topics surrounding high-risk drunk drivers at national, regional, and state conferences throughout the country, and he's also an adjunct professor at Arizona State University. So welcome, Mark. You may now share your screen and begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, and I'm sorry I jumped the gun. I guess I'm just so excited to get rolling here that I got ahead of myself. So welcome, everybody. I am so glad that you are able to participate in this, and I am speaking to you from Phoenix, Arizona. And I probably shouldn't talk to you about the weather right now because that would be a little bit rude on my part. But always remember that when you have these glorious summers in the Carolinas or wherever you're from, it'll be like 120 in Phoenix. And when people say it's a dry heat, I always like to remind them that so is an oven. So let me talk to you a little bit about why this particular topic after the conviction. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to co-present at a Lifesavers conference, and there were about maybe 100 people in the audience, and we asked them how many people knew with some degree of certainty what happens to defendants after they have been convicted and sentenced. And honestly, there were maybe a couple handful of hands that were raised when that question was asked, which really kind of brought out the reason for this topic is to understand what should be happening when we are dealing with the DUI population and what appropriate supervision, treatment, assessment, what that should look like in working with this population. So over the next 45 minutes, if I talk really fast, I want to give you a little bit of background on partly on the state of the state. And I know that given this audience, you're much more sophisticated than many of the other audiences that I deal with in probation. So I'm going to touch on that briefly, but then really get into what we should be doing, what supervision should look like when we're dealing with this particular population. I should also add that my position is funded by National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So thanks to them, they have been great partners in working with American Probation and Parole Association and really recognizing that there is a significant role they can play in assisting with that high-risk population. So very briefly, want to talk about what we're seeing, what these populations are looking like. And one of the things I really try to impart in my travels around the country, especially to probation departments, is just how things have been changing with the DUI population. So 2019, about 1 million individuals were arrested for impaired driving, and that number was pretty consistent from one year to the next until COVID hit. And two things happened. The number of DUI arrests dropped by about 70%, and the number of individuals that were involved in fatality crashes went up by about 14%. There were fewer boots on the ground, just as everyone was getting COVID, so was law enforcement, so were probation staff. So we've seen this trend that has been going in the wrong direction over the last several years, and the numbers that we've been seeing since 2020, though I haven't seen anything official come from NHTSA, continue to go in the wrong direction. But I do want to mention one of the bullets on this slide that I think is important to bring up, and that is 121 million drunk driving episodes that occurred in 2019. Now, that's not 121 million people. These are episodes. So conceivably, in my probation background, I could have had somebody on my caseload that drove 5-6 times a day under the influence of alcohol and/or drugs. So you look at the number of episodes and you look at the number of DUI arrests, and it really brings to light the fact we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. Another statistic that I think is important to mention is the number of times people are driving impaired before they're actually stopped. And NHTSA has suggested that typically drivers drive impaired about 80 times before they are stopped. Ed Latessa, University of Cincinnati, suggests that more realistic numbers are about 200 times impaired in urban areas and about 2,000 times impaired in rural communities. And when you think about it, in a rural environment, it's much more likely that, barring a crash, somebody can drive from point A to point B without being stopped, just because the nature of a rural area or a frontier area, you're not going to have the same volume of law enforcement present. So again, we continue to go in the wrong direction when we're looking at the number of people who have been killed in these DUI crashes. We had made progress until about 2010. Then things tended to plateau. And then more recently, again, we are going in the wrong direction, which is certainly a great cause for concern. And as I mentioned, the number of DUI arrests going down and the number of fatalities going up, we're seeing this in North Carolina, as well as pretty much every other state in the country. When you look at the number of DUI arrests in North Carolina from 2017 to 2020, you see a drop from 19 to 20. And then when you look at the number of fatalities, you see that increase that occurred in 2020. So this is what we're faced with. I don't know where you live in North Carolina, and I know there's some other people from other states that have joined this, but this gives an idea of what we're seeing within each county in the Carolinas. On the right is actually much more telling, and these are DUI fatalities per 100,000 population. Those counties in red are in the upper third, gold are in the middle third, and then the counties that are in green are in the lower third. So this is what we're faced with. We have got our share of challenges ahead of us. And if that wasn't enough, we're seeing the impact of marijuana and impaired driving. As I mentioned, I live in Arizona. No one is going to accuse Arizona of being a blue state. In fact, we're still fighting over the 2020 election in Arizona, and we probably will be for the next 10 years. But ironically, as many contested elections and ballot measures that we had in Arizona, the one that wasn't contested in 2020 was legalization of recreational marijuana. It passed by 60% of the vote. So who are these people who are voting for this? Libertarians that want less government. It could be conservatives that want the tax revenue. It could be liberals that wanted to see individuals with marijuana convictions have those decriminalized. But the bottom line, folks, is this train is leaving the station. I have to update this map when I present almost every month because this landscape continues to change so consistently. So just another example of some of the challenges that we're seeing that can impact the impaired driving population. And one of the pieces that's really important to remember, and again, one that I try to impart to my probation colleagues, is that you can't make an assumption that when somebody is arrested for a DUI, that alcohol was the only thing on board. These are the only investigations where you can find the investigation for a DUI stop when you hit that 0.08 or that 0.10. And you can understand why. We've been studying alcohol impaired driving for decades. But again, the important thing that we need to remember is we have these individuals that have been convicted. You see, I even have this in bright red to get officers to remember when you receive these cases that you may very well have a polysubstance user that we're dealing with and not just somebody who is consuming alcohol. And you can't look at just age to be part of this. You could have the 80-year-old man who's been drinking Pabst Blue Ribbon beer since the Korean War, and we can't assume that alcohol is the only thing that's going to be on board with this population. So now that I've depressed you with this information, let me depress you a little bit more when I talk about community supervision, and we can kind of translate what we're seeing with this research and the statistics with what we see with the probation population. So about 3.9 million individuals are under community supervision in this country. So this could be probation, this could be parole, it could be individuals who are reporting directly to the court, but about 3.9 million individuals that we're seeing with this population. So these numbers have gone down, so that is something that is encouraging to see. About 15% of this population, which is about 750,000 people that we're supervising, have a DUI on their arrest conviction. Now, that doesn't mean that that's why they're being supervised, but we do know a significant portion of this population at some point got loaded, got behind the wheel of a vehicle, and were arrested for a DUI. About 8% of this population, which is about 350,000 or so, about 8% of this population have 3 or more DUI convictions in their arrest history. We can pretty safely assume that that is the population that we're seeing under supervision. And then finally, about 2/3 of the people that are under community supervision are drug or alcohol involved. In my experience, and I think officers would agree with this, you usually didn't have to scratch too far in looking at a client to see at least minimally a casual relationship between drugs and alcohol and the offense that was committed. So this is what we're faced with. And one of the things I really try to emphasize with probation is putting DUIs aside. If you have somebody who is being supervised that has access to an automobile, it is important that we have that conversation with them regarding the fact that their lives can go from bad to much worse were they to be impaired and get behind the wheel of that vehicle. So that is something that we really try to emphasize. So I'm going to give you a little bit of good news. The good news is about 2/3 of the people that receive a DUI, that first DUI is their last DUI. We don't know that they stopped drinking. I'm not quite sure for our purposes if it particularly matters, but it could be the shame of being arrested, perhaps losing a job, perhaps even losing your family. For whatever reason, those first DUIs for 2/3 of this group are their last DUIs, which of course means that we have that other third that don't learn the first time, the second time, that continue to revolve in through our system. And again, this is the population that typically garners the most attention in community supervision after that conviction. So some of the challenges that we deal with in community supervision in dealing with the DUI population really has to do with attitude. So back in the Stone Age, when I was a young probation officer taking a horse and chariot to work, I remember my first DUI case. He was in the lobby, came up to me and said, "I have got great news for you." Well, who doesn't like to hear great news? And he said, "I'm not a criminal. I'm not like those other people in the lobby. I just got a DUI." And then from there, you can imagine, because you've all probably heard it at one point or another, I only had 2 beers. The cops were out to get me. Again, I'm not a criminal. It's not illegal to drink. It's not illegal to drink and drive. So just strong attitude to be dismissive, to look at what they did as really not a criminal activity. The other one is I don't need treatment. I can do it myself, which works exactly never. And then we also hear and see clients who will tell us, "I've never been drunk in my life," despite the fact they have multiple DUIs. So these are some of the challenges that we have to deal with in working with this population. The other issue that we have, and part of the reason that I bring this up, is that hopefully as you communicate with community supervision, if you're finding that your departments or jurisdictions aren't really addressing this as they should be, that you have some ammunition that you can be looking at to assist. Folks, DUI cases that are under supervision are the most inconsistently supervised populations in the criminal justice system. We are all over the map in how we work with this group. We have some jurisdictions that get it right, where they screen and assess every individual who has a DUI. They supervise them with low caseloads, and they are trained in dealing with the characteristics of this population. Unfortunately, that's the exception to the rule. There are jurisdictions that have caseloads of 300 DUIs to one officer. If you want to work in private probation in Mississippi, and by the way, I'd recommend you don't do that. If you did, you could be looking at caseloads of 800 DUIs per officer. On top of that, there are jurisdictions that should know better, that take all DUI cases and place them on unsupervised or banked caseloads. And research tells us if these individuals have been screened and assessed and have been screened as being low risk, that might be a wise decision. But if you haven't done that, you can't determine who those people are who are risk to the community versus those that perhaps are not. So community supervision has a long way to go in addressing these issues. The other reality is this: most probation departments, community supervision officers have blended caseloads. By that, I mean they may have 10 DUI cases on a caseload of, say, 80, in addition to violent offenders, perhaps sex offenders, cases that are getting lots of media attention, those high-profile cases. And the end result of that is these DUIs oftentimes get tamped down, where they are not given the attention that they should be. So I have a quick contest for you. I want to give you 3 case scenarios, and actually you can use your Q&A or your chat on this. I want you to tell me which one of these 3 individuals is most likely to recidivate. And by that, I mean most likely to get a new DUI. So contestant number 1 is a 23-year-old man who was arrested for an extreme DUI. He has no other prior criminal activity as an adult. He has a petty theft charge as a juvenile. Contestant number 2 is a 55-year-old woman arrested for an extreme DUI. She has a prior DUI about 8 years ago, no other arrest history. And then finally, contestant number 3 is a somewhat over-the-hill actor arrested for an extreme DUI. He has a prior DUI about 12 years earlier. So via the chat or the Q&A line, whichever you prefer, which one of these individuals do you think is most likely to reoffend, most likely to get a DUI? Contestants 1, 2, or 3? And I'll wait just a minute to look at responses.
And I've enabled chat actually for this quick flash poll. So
Okay.
Feel free to open up chat, folks, and enter 1, 2, or 3 for your response.
All right. So looking at the poll results, it looks like it's kind of a tie between 2 and 3. I do need to mention that contestant number 2 is the one who's almost always picked. And actually that is my wife, Susan. And I should probably mention she didn't really get a DUI, but she always seems to be picked. I did this live about 3 years ago, and there was a woman in the audience who said, it's got to be contestant number 2. She looks like a total drunk, which I found very funny, but for some reason my wife did not. But here's the answer. The answer is beats the heck out of me. But the information I just gave you, arrest history, age, I could have added something regarding employment, is typically the same information the courts receive when they're making decisions as to the most appropriate sentencing option for these individuals. So what we need to look at is what are some of the other factors that contribute to recidivism with the DUI population, and really address that. So here's what we found. With the impaired driving population, this first one, which I would describe as the medium high risk, is typically we're looking at white males between the ages of 20 and 45. That sweet spot is typically between the ages of 20 and 30. These are kind of those Teflon individuals that maybe haven't experienced the long-term impacts of drug and alcohol use. This population is employed and educated at a higher rate than other individuals who are under community supervision. That doesn't mean that they're at a higher rate than the general population, but we find that those risk factors look a little different. I'm going to get into this more in a minute. Look a little different than they do with the rest of the community supervision population. We see typically high BAC levels, 0.15 or above, more binge drinking, which is defined as 5 or more drinks for a man in a 2-hour period, 4 or more drinks for a woman in that same period. This is a population that also has other substance use disorders. And finally, they have personality, psychosocial factors that increase the risk of reoffending. irritable, aggressive, thrill-seeking, impulsive, just a ton of fun to supervise. Then we start looking at what the characteristics are of that higher risk population. Overwhelmingly male, about 90%. More often, this is a population that's single, separated, or divorced. And if you remember the last bullet on the previous slide, you can kind of understand why. Tend to have lower levels of education and income, higher levels of employment compared to first offense DUIs, but still higher, again, than the general community supervision population. Tend to have much higher BACs and early onset of drinking, family history, misuse of alcohol. Folks, it's not unusual to find individuals whose drinking behavior started at age 10 or 11 years of age. Individuals where father and mother both had substance use disorders, and culturally this could be part of the general population and or their culture, and it's been that way for decades. So those are some of the major factors. Some of the other things that we see with a high-risk population: cognitive impairments due to long-term alcohol dependence, higher disregard for authority, and indications of antisocial personality and lack of motivation. And let me touch on this for just a second. What we have seen, and this is anecdotal, but I hear it consistently, is that it's more and more common for individuals who have multiple DUIs, for those same individuals to opt to do their jail time or their prison time rather than community supervision. And part of it is that with jail overcrowding, prison overcrowding, they may not have to serve as lengthy a sentence, but I think it also speaks to that level of motivation. They don't want somebody following after them. They don't want the supervision that comes with it. And quite frankly, for some of our individuals, they can do 6 months in jail standing on their head. The threat of incarceration just is not necessarily much of an impact to them. So the other thing that we have to be mindful of is criminogenic risk factors. And this is something, especially for community supervision, that they should be very familiar with. The main risk factors for anybody in the criminal justice system includes history of antisocial behavior, antisocial thinking, antisocial personality, antisocial associates, and then what's oftentimes referred to as the moderate 4 or the lesser 4, your family situation, your marital situation, what you do in your spare time, what your education looks like, and your employment. And the important thing to remember is all of these risk factors are feeders for substance use. So if we're not addressing these in our supervision terms, if we're not looking at these factors, we can really be missing the boat, because these can be the drivers for that substance use. Which brings us to screening and assessment. And I want to talk about what makes the DUI population different than those individuals that we see in other facets of community supervision. So one of the questions that I typically ask my community supervision friends is, number one, do you assess for risk and needs with your impaired driving population? And then number two, and these responses can be very different, do your assessment tools tell you what you need to know? So I can tell you that typically when I ask the first question, maybe 15 or 20% of my audience will raise their hand. When I ask, do these tools tell you what you need to know, maybe half of that group will raise their hand. So the bottom line is there is a real need to have DUI-specific tools that assist officers in determining what supervision is going to look like, treatment, sentencing options, and the like. And here is the major reason that we need to have a DUI-specific assessments. Folks, in community supervision over the last 25 years, we have been living in the era of assessment-driven supervision. We rely on tools that assist in giving us a sense of what kind of response we should have to clients based on the type of offense. And what we have learned and what research has shown us is the criminogenic risk factors for the DUI population look different than other members of the criminal justice population. And this has really come out loud and clear over the last 20 years. We've had probation departments and officers that have talked about using generic assessment tools. In other words, those tools that apply to the general criminal justice population. We've used these tools, and what they do is they screen the DUI population as low risk and low needs, and we know that they're not. And officers were basically telling anybody who's listening, these people score out low risk, and we find that they are getting new DUIs or worse. The generic assessment tools are not adequately assessing the true risk of these populations. And some of the things that set this group apart, again, is that education tends to be higher, employment tends to be more stable, even family situation tends to be more stable. So we have to use DUI-specific assessment tools to best capture this. So screening is really that triage that takes place with the DUI population, and it's using tools such as the RANT DUI, tools that can be conducted fairly quickly that gives a snapshot of what is going on. This, and as a practical matter, these might take 10 or 15 minutes. When we have somebody that scores high in a screener, that's when we want to be doing an assessment. And the assessment process takes longer, but the value of it is, first of all, if you're doing this at pre-sentence, it can assist the court in determining the most appropriate sentence to make. It can help with your case management plan, help in determining what level of supervision a client should be receiving. And then finally, it should be offering you assistance in what the treatment should look like. And as you're going to see, treatment may not be simply directed at substance use. It could be other factors that come into this. So these assessments can be done at any point in the process, pre-trial, pre-sentence. Typically, the tools that I'm going to be talking about are done post-sentence. But the bottom line is, while it's better to do it earlier, there's no bad time to do it. And here's what we found. I'm going to talk about the Impaired Driving Assessment, which is a tool developed by National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And what was discovered was that there are 5 major risk factors for DUI recidivism. And these risk factors are captured with the Impaired Driving Assessment. So the first factor is prior involvement specifically related to impaired driving. Well, I know that's pretty obvious, but here's the reality. The more prior DUI somebody has, the more likely they are to get a new DUI. Second factor, prior non-DUI involvement in the justice system. And this is actually twofold. What research is telling us is individuals that have significant numbers of traffic citations. So running red lights, speeding, driving without a license, driving without insurance are more likely to get a future DUI. Well, why is that? What's their attitude towards authority? What's their attitude towards other people? Again, some of those criminogenic risk factors that we talked about. And then the second part of this is individuals with criminal involvement in the justice system that is not DUI for the same reasons. So the individuals with drug charges, theft charges, those same kind of mindsets are part of that risk factor. Third risk factor we see, prior involvement, not just with alcohol, but with other drugs, that polysubstance using population. Those individuals that if we're going to put an ignition interlock on their vehicle, they may decide, you know what, that's fine, you can do that. I'm just going to start smoking weed. And if you're going to start testing for that, let's just see what's in grandma's medicine cabinet, and that's what I'm going to use. So that polysubstance using population, those garbage can users that can use a variety and do use a variety of different substances. Fourth factor, mental health and mood adjustment problems. Research tells us that 33% of men and 50% of women with multiple DUIs in their history have a diagnosable mental health condition. PTSD can be way up there with this population. Oftentimes, DUIs may be the entry point for veterans court for individuals who are in the criminal justice population. But beyond that, depression, any diagnosable mental health condition is something we need to be looking at. And if we're not looking at mental health, again, folks, we could be missing the boat with what's going on with this population. Final factor, resistance and noncompliance with current and past involvement in the justice system. Research has shown there is a strong correlation between people who fail ignition interlock, be it not putting it on their vehicle or having lockouts, and a future DUI. But second to that, individuals that don't complete treatment, don't complete community supervision, all those are factors for future DUIs. Now, does this apply to the drug impaired driver? And the answer is yes. We see the same behaviors with the polysubstance using and drug impaired driver as we do with the alcohol DUI. So again, these assessment tools that are designed specifically for the DUI population, we can use them at any juncture in the criminal justice process. What we ask, again, I'm going to talk about a couple of these assessment tools, but whatever tool, whatever DUI assessment tool is used, we ask that number one, it's a validated tool. Number two, that it's reliable, it's standardized, it's appropriate for the DUI population, that it's relatively easy to use. Typically, these assessment tools can be done with paraprofessionals, so you don't have to be a licensed clinician to do this assessment. Most importantly, that informs decision-making. If it doesn't do that, then we're just shuffling paper and wasting our time. And then finally, I know cost can be a factor. The tools I want to talk about are both free. The Impaired Driving Assessment, again, is a tool developed by American Probation and Parole Association with funding by NHTSA that is designed primarily for probation officers, but again, treatment providers can use it. As a practical matter, it takes about 20 to 45 minutes to conduct the assessment. Occasionally, I get a little pushback from probation officers regarding the time constraints, but my response to that is, which would you rather do? Spend 20 to 45 minutes doing this assessment, or spend hours dealing with the DUI case that you discover after the fact is high risk and having to play cat and mouse and chasing them? CARS is another tool. This is developed through Harvard, and this is a tool that is primarily designed to determine treatment needs. In the interest of time, I'm not going to get into too much of it, but after the training, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. A shameless plug here, I do IDA certification training. The training is free. Everything associated with the tool is free. So you can contact me if this is something you'd like to hear more about. Now let's talk a little bit about how we go about supervising the impaired driving population. And one of the key pieces that we need to be remembering is that for us to be successful, we need to be coordinating with all the powers that be. In other words, my community supervision friends, we can't be looking at supervision in a silo. We need to actively work with the courts, with treatment, with technologies. All those are factors in being successful. So the more that we coordinate, the more that we collaborate, the more successful we're going to be. So we want to look, number one, at that assessment piece. Then once we've done the assessment, we've determined the risk and needs, how can we best work together? So that includes using the different alcohol technologies that are available and are really paramount in what supervision should look like. The reality is that these tools should really be situation-based. We've got lots of options, and oftentimes we can best determine what technology option we should use based on that risk of the client. And if we're not using these tools, especially when it comes to alcohol, we really have no certainty that our clients are abiding by their terms. And as a rule of thumb, we don't want our clients living with us. So the next best thing is to use these technologies. And where we're most successful is using these technologies coupled with treatment and coupled with supervision. So that is essentially the three-legged stool that leads to the greatest success in changing the behaviors of this DUI population. And then when we're looking at treatment and some of the factors we should be considering, it's important to remember this: about 4% of the individuals who have an alcohol use disorder, and this number is probably just as high, maybe even higher with other substances, about 4% of the individuals who need or are receiving treatment that need it. And oftentimes there is treatment available. It's just getting these individuals to respond to it. What we strongly suggest in community supervision is that we're looking closely at treatment. Is the treatment evidence-based? Is the treatment research-based? Is it approved by SAMHSA? There are oftentimes very well-meaning individuals that maybe have mom and pop treatment that worked for them. That doesn't mean it's research-based. So what this translates to for this audience is that it's important that we're asking our treatment providers the right questions. Is the treatment manual-based? Is it approved? If somebody is being ordered to intensive outpatient treatment, that translates to 9 hours a week of group treatment or 6 hours a week of group treatment coupled with 1 hour of individual treatment. If somebody says they're intensive outpatient and they're doing a program that's 2 or 3 hours, it's not intensive outpatient. That's why it's so important that we be asking these questions. What research has also shown is intensive outpatient programming is most likely to be successful with individuals that have community support. Residential treatment can be most successful with those people that don't have that community and family support. DUI courts. If I were king of the world, and my family has assured me that I'm not, if I was, I would be advocating for DUI courts to be available to every high-risk, high-needs individual that we are seeing in our communities. And the reason I say this, folks, they work. The research supports it. We see reduced recidivism to the tune of about 13% over individuals who are not in DUI courts. And again, the population we're looking at are individuals that essentially have 1 foot in a prison cell, the high risk, high needs population. And what we have found is that those individuals, regardless of whether it is a alcohol DUI or a polysubstance or a drug DUI, that they can do best in a DUI court. And the reason that these courts are effective is that they target the correct population, or they should be, that we're looking at assessment, we're looking at treatments, that these are essentially wraparound services. The judge in DUI courts plays a major role in the success of these programs. So they're looking at dealing with every obstacle that could prevent somebody from being successful to participate in these courts. So again, if this is something you'd like to know more about, I'm happy to provide you some of that information. Again, the key pieces after the conviction is we're assessing these individuals, we're supervising these individuals, we're providing them with appropriate treatment based on their individual needs. That's where our focus needs to be. So what could possibly go wrong? This photo was taken about 5 blocks from my house. What could possibly go wrong with a tattoo expo and a beer fest? It could be worse. I did a training in Wyoming, and an individual told me that they had a beer fest and gun show. But what could go wrong is working in silos, not communicating, not looking at how we can collaborate in addressing all of these issues. And I'm just going to cite one example of where collaboration could be so important. The cost, the out-of-pocket cost for an individual who receives a DUI can be anywhere from $300 to $500 a month. If you're looking at the cost of ignition interlock, treatment, the fines associated with the DUI, the fees, probation service fees associated with this, and we may have the unintended consequence of taking somebody and making it next to impossible for them to be successful. So for example, when I, again, was a young probation officer, I remember an individual who was on for a DUI who wasn't paying his probation service fees. And I said, and I thought I was really cool when I said this, if you can afford your probation service fees or your beer, you can certainly afford your probation service fees. What I didn't realize was that you could have an interlock provider or a treatment provider saying the same thing. And that's just an example of where by collaborating, then maybe we can stagger some of the fines and fees so that it is attainable for our clients. And again, most importantly, that they are being successful in their supervision. So that is really part of why it's so important that we focus on this. So again, we need to individualize justice. We need to look at the individual and not just the charge. The days of what I used to have, what was referred to me as an officer of following the bottle is long gone. This is a much more complex issue. We want to focus on the individual. We need to recognize that we can't do one size fits all supervision for this population. and that if we want to be holding them accountable, which ultimately is our goal here, we want to be making sure that we're using all the different tools at our disposal. So with that said, I am happy to entertain any questions that you have. And also I want to give you my contact information. So please, if there's anything I can do for you, don't hesitate to send me an email. As Eugene gave my little bio, if you added up all the years I've been doing this, it explains, number one, the gray hair I have, but I know people. And if I don't have an answer for you, I probably know somebody who does. So please, if I can be of service, don't hesitate to contact me. So with that said, Eugene, if I don't know if you want to unmute, or if there are questions that you'd like me to try to address, I'm happy to do so.
Yes, Mark, thank you so much for that great presentation. And just as a reminder to folks, use the Q&A tool, or you can raise your hand, use the raise an hand icon if you'd like to speak a question or comment. And Mark, while you're still sharing your slides, we do have a couple of questions in Q&A that refer back to some earlier slides. The first one, I believe, refers to slide 10. If you're able to go back to that slide.
Let me see if I can, just a second.
It's a map, yes, of the U.S. So the question is that the chart reflected North Carolina in light green as potentially being decriminalized. The comment says, however, all drugs are 100% illegal. This is coming from one of our law enforcement participants. Are we understanding that graphic correctly?
Well, first of all, I got to make sure I can find the correct correlation. What I have, and I can refer you and send you information to the website where I received this. But if I'm seeing this correctly, our options are the states in black are everything is legalized. The states in dark green is medical and medical and decriminalized. That medium green is medical, and then what I see here under light green was decriminalized. So that was based on research that I received, and I don't know if this is maybe if there's a difference between the amount of marijuana in somebody's possession, but I'd be happy to look further. But that slide was based on a website where I received that information. And just by way of the other, the states in light gray is CBD and THC only. And I think now we have 4 states left where it is fully illegal. But if this is incorrect, I'm happy to take a look and Eugene, send you whatever I can to try to get clarification.
Mark, thank you. And Emerson, if you'd like some us to provide Mark to provide some additional links to information, we can follow up with an email and include that in an email. And I also wanted to say that Mark's contact information will also be in a follow-up email following today's presentation. The other question in Q&A right now refers back, I believe, to slide number 6. I'd like to scroll up that. In this slide, you showed the North Carolina arrests by year. This question is coming from Joe Rogowski. Joe says he's been searching for North Carolina arrests by county for 20 and 21, but no North Carolina agency can tell him where to find that information. He does have 20 and 21 DWI convictions per the Sentencing Commission. Can you offer any insight on where he might be able to find arrests by county?
I'm happy. Well, arrest by county, I don't have that information. What you're seeing in slide 6 was information that I obtained from the FBI. I can look because frankly, some of this involve different sources providing the information. So what I can do is look at the specific source that I got that from and see if it's maybe more granular information than what I have there. But again, I can dig that up and send you what I have, if that'll help.
Okay, again, Joe, just let us know if you'd like Mark to dig up some more references. Thank you. We got another question in Q&A. Thank you, Joe. Give me 1 second. I'm going to switch back over to my screen now, and got a little bit longer for questions. So this question, arrests by county. Oh, good. That's from Robbie Hassel. Arrests by county are available through the UNC School of Government dashboard and website maintained by Professor Jessica Smith with the Criminal Justice Innovation Lab. Robbie, thank you very much for that reference. We appreciate that.
Good.
Terrific. So no more questions in Q&A at the moment. We've got a little bit more time for Q&A. So while we're waiting for any more questions to come in, Mark, let me ask, what do you consider to be the most important thing for this audience to know about community supervision and impaired driving?
I think just if you are in law enforcement, if you are a prosecutor, if you are a judge, I think it's important to ask questions of the individuals that are providing supervision in your jurisdiction. And some of the pieces that I touched on, I think would be certainly worthy of having a conversation. You know, what does supervision look like? You know, are there ways that we can better collaborate with each other depending on what resources you bring to the table? But I think asking those questions, and if you're finding that your jurisdiction is really lacking, there are lots of resources that are available, especially as it relates to community supervision, that can be of assistance. But I think the main thing is just having those conversations where we're looking at, you know, what happens after that conviction. We're all on the same page, and that we want that last DUI to be the last DUI. And that is where I think it's really important that we're looking at what work is being done in your particular jurisdiction.
Mark, thank you so much. We're just about out of time here, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the Q&A. And I want to thank you again for a great presentation. I want to thank everyone who's joined us today. If you do have some additional questions, we will you go ahead and, well, I'll leave the Q&A open here for a few more minutes. You can add those and we'll try to get a response by email afterwards. And before you leave the meeting, feel free to share any other suggestions in the Q&A window on how we can improve our webinar series, including future topics you'd like to learn about. So again, as I mentioned, following today's webinar, you'll receive an email with the recording link, so be sure to watch for that. And that email will also include a link to request a participation certificate if you'd like one. So be sure to use the link in the email to request a certificate. Any professional engineers with us today, you can earn a PDH for participating in the webinar. You'll also find a link in that email to complete your NC-BELS evaluation. Please do note that only attendees in the live webinar may receive a certificate. If you're watching this recording, we're unable to award certificates for the recording, only for participating live. So we invite you to join us again for other traffic safety webinars that we have planned for this series. So please visit our website at the link you see there for a list of upcoming webinars. We'll also be getting, you'll also be getting some email announcements as well when those are coming up. And also at our website, you'll find information about the North Carolina Traffic Safety Conference and Expo. We had our most recent one last year. Our next one will be in 2024. So you've got some time to plan, but we do hope you will plan to attend that next conference. And until then, we want to thank you once again for participating in today's webinar, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.